Hi, I'm James, and today we are looking at this, which is the Dell Inspiron 5620 laptop. This is a completely self-funded review. This is not a unit we've been supplied with by Dell or been paid to purchase by a sponsor. This is one that we have bought to look at ourselves. So I'd like to just start by saying, if you find this video useful, do let us know by giving us a like, letting us know in the comments, or subscribing if you'd like to see more videos. But without further ado, I'm going to get this new machine unboxed and take a look at it. So looking inside the box, of course, we have the laptop itself, safety and regulatory information and wireless radio directives, the typical 65-watt Dell power supply with power lead, and then our quick start guide, which goes through the very basics of connecting the laptop to the power, powering it on, and also covers some bits like the privacy cover and ports around the laptop. So what is new with the Dell Inspiron series in 2022? Well, compared to its direct predecessor, the Inspiron 5510, obviously the first thing you'll notice is that we have a change in screen size. The predecessor, the Inspiron 15, had a 15.6-inch display, and as the name suggests, this now is a 16-inch display. Now this is not actually making the screen wider. Instead, the extra 0.4 of an inch is because the screen is now a 16:10 aspect ratio panel. This means you get an extra 120 rows of pixels at the bottom of the screen, so you are gaining more vertical height in the display. This is great for working on documents, but does have some minor drawbacks when viewing media and in some applications. Even so, the actual width of the laptop remains almost identical to its predecessor, as does the thickness of the laptop at just under 18mm at its thickest point. But because of that extra screen size, the depth of the laptop from front to back does grow around 2 centimeters compared to that Inspiron 5510. Aside from the change in screen aspect ratio and size, one of the biggest changes for the 5620 as opposed to the 5510 that preceded it is the move to Intel's 12th gen core microarchitecture. And this uses what Intel term a performance hybrid architecture, where you have a mixture of performance and efficiency focused cores. Now, because this particular laptop uses the Core i5-1235U, we have what is called the ultra mobile version of the 12th gen Core Alder Lake chip, and this features a pair of these large performance cores which feature hyperthreading, so 2 threads each, and run at speeds of up to, I believe, about 4.4 GHz. And then we also have 8 of these smaller efficiency cores which are in these 2 groups, and these run up to about 3.3 GHz and carry out the lighter tasks that the system is asked to use. So they take up much less area, much less power, and can be used for background processes without sort of troubling these larger, more power-hungry cores, at least in theory. What you do also find is that you have the same Intel Iris Xe graphics with 80 execution units as you would have found in an 11th gen core architecture processor. So graphics-wise, this does remain much the same. Of course, while we have a number of design changes for this year's Intel-based machines, it is worth noting that the design is almost identical to the AMD models released earlier in the year. On the left here, we have the Inspiron 5425 with AMD Ryzen 5 5625U processor. And this is a near identical design with the same sort of shaping around the palm rest, same 1610 screen, albeit smaller in this machine. There is a 16-inch version and a 14-inch version of both models available. The 16-inch model just gets these speaker vents down the side, but otherwise they are very similar, and the styling of both the AMD and Intel versions of the 5420 or 25 and the 5620 or 25 are basically the same. So really just the difference between these models is the internals with either the AMD processors or Intel. So with all that in mind, let's take a look at the 5620 itself. The finish of these machines is referred to as platinum silver, and the outer body of the lid and the palm rest is made from aluminium over a plastic shell. When we look to the base of the laptop, this matches in colour, but is a plastic finish to allow for it to clip into place. Looking at the laptop's ports, we see we have our standard Dell charger, a HDMI 1.4 port, so not HDMI 2, so you can't actually use this HDMI port for 4K 60Hz, which is somewhat disappointing in 2022. A USB 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 gigabit per second USB-A port, and a USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 USB-C port. So this, with the correct devices, can support up to 20 gigabit per second transfer speeds. It also supports DisplayPort output, so you can get 4K 60Hz from this, and can also be used to charge the device with a USB PD charger. So you can use this as a single docking connector for screen, power and so on, which is something I will demonstrate later. On the right hand side we have our headphone jack, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 USB-A connector again, and a full-size SD card reader, useful for if you need to put in your camera card or similar. You also find that on opening the laptop, this bumper section on the back of it does lift the laptop up off the desk, so to give you quite a significant air gap for cooling when you are using this on a hard surface. Looking at input devices, and the first thing you notice on opening up this machine is that the touchpad is huge compared to what came before it. Compared to the 5510, it is, I believe, 18mm wider at 133mm and 10mm taller at 90mm in total. This is a mylar coated touchpad and gives a really nice feel just moving it around, supports all the usual Windows gestures and everything else, and should be a good, precise touchpad. It certainly, on first impressions, feels perfectly nice. The keyboard also has a very noticeable change to the 5510 in that Dell have chosen to reduce from a 100 key layout with numpad to a 80 key layout without. This means they have centralised the keyboard and added the upward firing speakers on each side. Now for some people this will be very disappointing. It's not something that matters too much for me because I don't make much use of the numpad, but I do know people who would almost find this, a deal breaker in terms of using a machine like this. Otherwise, it is a fairly standard layout for Dell. It retains their chiclet design built into the palm rest of the machine. That does mean if the keyboard is damaged, you would probably have to replace this entire top panel. But otherwise, we have, for a UK layout, the full height enter key, a split shift and slash key here. Things that are going to be different if you're looking at this in the US or other regions, but do make a big difference for UK layouts, something that particularly HP are bad at fiddling with and making it a bit awkward for some users in the UK. Otherwise, we have our standard backlighting, which has 3 levels, so a bit light in here to see, but we have on, full and off. And we also have our fingerprint reader, which can be used for signing into the machine. There's no Windows Hello camera on this, so if you want to use biometric sign-in, it's going to be that fingerprint there, which I found is generally pretty reliable. Dell use this reader across a lot of their laptops, and I rarely have any issues with them. The exhaust for the cooling is also located here at the top right side of the palm rest. This vents along the bottom of the screen, and there is a fake vent on the other side here for symmetry purposes, but this is all blocked off. It's possible on models featuring NVIDIA discrete graphics that this venting is unblocked for additional heatsink, but we don't get those models offered here in the UK. It's just something that I can see is an option in the spec sheet. Now, as previously mentioned, the screen is a larger 16-inch panel, which gives us a 16:10 aspect ratio. What this means is that the screen gains some extra vertical height. So compared to an example here on my work laptop, we can see, coming back to this, we can get the top of the trending bar on this page, which is not visible on the 16:9 display, and we get that because of this extra vertical resolution. Compared to the 5510, the screen is still the same width and it is still the same pixel count across, 1920, so you don't make things smaller on the screen in this case. The extra screen size and that change in aspect ratio is just buying you more vertical space. The trade-off in this, however, is when playing back video content in a 16:9 format, you are going to get these black bars at the top and bottom. This is purely because the content doesn't fill the screen. This is, again, we have an extra 120 pixels, which are just not used by the video content. So that will also apply to some games if they don't support this 16:10 aspect ratio. Aside from the unusual aspect ratio, this is a fairly standard fare for a Dell 5000 series laptop display. By that I mean we have a 250 nit brightness panel, which uses a WVA technology, so wide viewing angle, but Dell do not specify SVA or IPS for these laptops. They only say WVA and are a bit obscure as to what that actually means. Elsewhere we have a 45% NTSC colour gamut and a 1000:1 contrast ratio. Refresh rate is 60 Hz, so no high refresh rate or variable refresh rate supported on this panel, which may be a bit disappointing for some. There are also in the spec sheets for the laptop Comfort View Plus screens, which either feature the same resolution but a wider colour gamut, higher contrast ratio and a little higher brightness, and a 3K version which features those changes and a higher screen resolution. These aren't, however, available in the UK currently, but may be an option in other markets. One observation I did have was simply that you do notice, while there isn't significant colour shift at wide viewing angles, you do have some loss of brightness when not viewing the display head on. So it's not excessive, it's certainly not as bad as you may find in some TM panels, but if you're comparing this to something like some of the Asus or HP models with OLED displays, you may find it a little bit disappointing by comparison. In the top of the screen we have a webcam here with privacy filter which can be slid across to cover it, and also a status indicator light to show when it is in use. We also have the dual array microphone with a small hole on either side for the stereo input to that. As with the 5425 I looked at previously, Dell have upgraded the webcam to a 1080p 30 frames per second device, unlike most of their previous laptops which had 720p webcams. Even so, you won't get huge amounts of detail with such a small plastic lens, and you can see here, even in a fairly well lit room, it is a bit noisy in the background on this image. In dark conditions you will certainly find that you have quite a grainy image, but at least they have gone up to a 1080p camera. As previously mentioned, speakers are mounted either side of the keyboard and upfiring through the vents in the palm rest. The volume goes reasonably high, however they are only 2 watts per channel and perhaps lacking in bass. So with that in mind, if you are really looking for something with music playback options, you may want to use external speakers or headphones. I'd say these are fairly typical of what you'd expect in this class of machine. So taking a look on the system itself, and I've already installed some tools so that we can look at some of the hardware specifics, but otherwise this is a standard Dell install. System confirms that we have a 12th gen Core i5-1235U processor, 8GB of RAM, and Windows 11 Home, as we'd expect with this system. It also came with a 512GB SSD. Looking in CPU Z, and this gives us some further information on the processor, confirming it is an Alder Lake 15-watt TDP processor. We can see the current clock speed of the number 0P core, and looking at the memory configuration, we can see that we have DDR4-3200 RAM in a single channel, so 64-bit configuration. Dell have opted with this machine not to go to DDR5-4800 modules and instead stick with the lower cost DDR4-3200 modules. Now, this may impact gaming performance, but more than that, the fact that it is only a single channel configuration will hit on that. If you buy a version of this laptop with 16 gigabytes, then you will get a dual channel configuration, and the memory in these is upgradable up to at least 32 gigs of RAM if you fit a pair of 16 gigabyte modules. This particular system shipped with a Kioxia 512GB SSD. This is a NVMe PCIe 4X device, but only using the 3.0 standard. Alder Lake and the laptop support PCIe 4.0 devices on one of the internal M2 slots. There is a second M2 slot which only supports M2 2230 devices on a 3.0 standard as well, but the main slot supports 2230 or 2280 and up to PCIe 4.0. That said, for power consumption and heat reasons, you probably wouldn't want to go fitting a PCIe 4.0 device into this laptop, and from a performance perspective, while it does give theoretical benefits, you get higher peak read and write speeds from a PCIe 4.0 device. In real world usage, the benefits aren't huge unless you are doing really specific tasks. And as we can see here in Crystal Disk Mark, the drive that we have fitted is still a pretty reasonable drive for an OEM system. We have a 2.3 gigabyte per second read speed and almost 1.5 gigabyte per second for write. Wireless networking is courtesy of an Intel AX211 Wi-Fi module, and this supports Wi-Fi 6E as you would expect from the name. It also has Bluetooth 5.2 support, and really this is what I would hope to find in a laptop like this. It's a very good module indeed. This particular laptop came with the smaller 54 watt-hour battery. There is a 64 watt-hour option as well, but again, this is not currently offered in the UK. Even so, having charged the battery and disconnected the adapter, it is predicting a battery life of around 7.5 hours. Obviously, this will depend heavily on your usage of the machine, but I would expect that to be kind of the maximum you're going to find from something like this. You may be able to find, if you put it into the power saver mode with best power efficiency, then you may get a little more than this. Or if you're using it with high screen brightness, gaming, or anything else like that is going to be particularly intensive, then you would expect this to be less. It's really going to depend on usage, and Dell don't give an exact figure, but having charged it, that is what the system predicts. So overall, what do I think of the Dell Inspiron 165620? Well, it's safe to say that I am a fan of the move to a 16:10 screen form factor. I find this really good for working, web browsing and emailing on, and I think the new design has been a definite success for this 5000 series for 2020. I'm also really excited to get my hands on a 12th generation Core i5 system, although I haven't obviously done any serious performance or battery testing on this yet. It does have the potential to really blend performance and efficiency in a way that is great both for applications and for battery life as a whole. I will be comparing this to my 11th gen Core i5 along with the Ryzen 5 5500U and 5625U in coming videos, so do hit subscribe if you would like to see those as they're released. The laptop also has a good base feature set, with having that USB-C 20 gigabit per second port, a 512GB SSD as standard, which offers really pretty good performance compared to a lot of OEM drives, a 1080p webcam, and a fingerprint sensor, all things which I would absolutely want to see at this price point now. Looking at negatives, I would say the speakers are average at best for this class of laptop. They are not exceptional. The screen could also be brighter at this price point, and there is no OLED option on this machine at all. Equally, while the screen is great for productivity uses, when you're viewing 16:9 content, you're going to have black borders at the top and bottom of the screen. The use of DDR4-3200, and particularly in a single channel configuration in this machine, is disappointing when Alder Lake supports DDR5, and I suspect this will hurt graphic performance, which could really have gained from the use of higher speed DDR5. The lack of a numpad on the keyboard may disappoint some users as well. I know there are some use cases, particularly friends who are accountants, who would just not consider a machine of this size which doesn't have that, but again, it really depends on your use of the system. And the final negative I would really say is that the current UK pricing for this at £729 is pretty expensive. I bought the system as soon as it became available because I wanted to get my hands on it straight away, and particularly to try out these 12th gen Core i5-U series chips, but I definitely paid a premium to do so. That said, Dell's pricing can be pretty fluid, so you might simply want to hang on until they have an offer or discounts available, which bring this more into line with where you might expect it. It's certainly not a bad system at this price, but I would not be surprised to see the price fall in the near future. So to conclude, I hope you found this video helpful. We've really focused on trying to get some of these systems as soon as they're available and to get reviews out there to people as soon as possible. That said, if you do have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you found this useful, hit like, and if you'd like to see the upgrade and performance videos and future reviews as we bring them out, hit the subscribe button so that you can see our videos as we post them. Thanks for watching.